The Hay Band Network.
Welcome to the Hay Band Network. Today we have a group of fantastic people, composers and college band directors and creators of fantastic band music. And we're actually here to talk about the Institute of Composer Diversity. And so first of all, I want to welcome Rob Deemer, Eric Leung, and Alex Shapiro to the Hay Band Network.
Thank you
And
for having us.
I'm going to start with Rob Deemer. I ran across this great website a couple months ago, Institute of Composer Diversity, and started digging around. I was just fascinated by what's on there and such a great tool it is. And I thought this would be a great place to share that. First of all, I want to welcome Rob Deemer, and he's a composer, educator, author, arts advocate, and has kind of runs this Institute of Composer Diversity. So tell us a little about yourself first, Rob.
Sure, and thank you again for having us here, Chad. It's wonderful for us to be able to talk to your listeners and viewers, I guess, since this is video. So yeah, I'm Rob Deemer. I teach composition here at the State University of New York in Fredonia, which is in Western New York, about an hour south of Buffalo, right here on Lake Erie. And in addition to that, I also work with NYSSMA, which is the New York All-State. I'm their composition chair. I'm also the composition chair of the NAFME President's Council, for the Council for Music Composition. And in my spare time, I am also the director for the Institute for Composer Diversity, a project I'm sure we'll get into, but started about 4 years ago. It's gone through several iterations, and now it seems to be an organization that people look to provide them with resources and tools.
Yeah, and that's what we're here is to kind of dive into that. So welcome and thanks. Our next guest I want to introduce is I'm just floored that we've got this guest on here because she's a great composer and does stuff all over the world. So welcome Alex Shapiro to the Hay Band Network.
Thank you, Chad. And I echo Rob's sentiments. This is really wonderful for you to have us on to have this great and important conversation. This is going to be fun. In short, I'm a worker bee composer, as you can see behind me. And in my spare time, I'm the symphonic and concert music representative, writer representative on the board of directors of ASCAP. And I also sit on the Aaron Copland Fund for Music board of directors. And I've been on Rob's advisory council or executive committee. I'm not quite sure what we call it, but I've been involved with his wonderful ICD pretty much since the inception in one way or another. So, and another tie-in with Rob is that I also was a guest a few years ago at NYSSMA. I was their composer in residence, which is the big New York State, event. It's great. So, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Wonderful and welcome. Thank you for joining us. And last, we have Eric Leung, who is the director of bands at Oregon State University.
Hey, Chad. Thanks so much for having the three of us. This is really, really cool that you're putting all this together. I just wanted to say a quick thing about myself. I'm, as you said, the director of bands here at Oregon State. And I am probably the newest member of ICD. I serve as the wind ensemble coordinator for that database. It's really super awesome. So.
Well, great to have you all here, and let's talk about ICD a little bit. Rob, you said this is something you kind of started, and I know Alex has been involved since the beginning. Tell us about the Institute for Composer Diversity.
Sure. So the whole thing started out as a project that I had for my students here at Fredonia. I've always thought it was good for students to be able to have access to find other composers that they might not normally find in your normal textbooks, or kind of outside of the bubble of what we think of as the typical canon, either historical or contemporary. And so I had this idea of putting together a spreadsheet listing women composers. This was back about summer of 2016. And, I had a list of composers that I already knew already, so I got started with that. And then I'm like, wait a minute, there are all these other lists you know, either on Wikipedia or other websites or books that I was able to find. And as I was putting this list together, I'm like, it's not really very useful to just have a list of names hyperlinked to websites, because if you're actually looking for something specific, that doesn't really help you very much, right? You still have to basically hunt and peck, and if you're able to find a needle in that haystack, you're lucky. But other than that, it's a haystack. And that summer, I just made the decision to be like, well, what if I had the ability to be able to search by whether or not they're living or deceased, where they happen to be living, if they were living, like what state were they in, or what city, or what country, if they're outside of the United States, as well as what genres of music they were writing or they had written, and what their demographics were. Were they white? Were they black? Were they Latinx or Asian? And so, yeah, that's basically, you know, when it comes down to it, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what this thing originally started out as a searchable database. And that took about almost 2 years to basically go from starting the project to a searchable online spreadsheet, a Google spreadsheet, that I, you know, had the great title Women Composers Database. It was, you know, it wasn't fancy, but it was useful. It had almost 3,000 composers on it. And at that point, it had a lot of people using it. So I'm like, all right, next thing I have to do is put it into a website so people could actually search and not have to deal with the clunkiness of a spreadsheet. But then also at that point, I'd also realized that just focusing on women composers, it was really important to do that. But there was also all these composers from all of these underrepresented heritages that that also needed similar resources. And so I expanded it out to male composers from all of those basically non-white groups. And in the summer of 2018, we founded composerdiversity.com, which is the website that you can still find us at. About 6 months later, at the beginning of 2019, we actually founded the Institute for Composer Diversity, which is affiliated here at the State University of New York at Fredonia. We don't get any money through the state, but they do allow for us to be able to affiliate with the university, as well as have an account where we can do fundraising and bring it in. So sometimes I have to mention that because people usually hear institute and they think it's this big glorious thing with a building and all sorts of funding, and I'm like, no, we have no building, we have very little money, but we do have a lot of people who are very, very supportive and hungry for these types of resources, and a whole lot of people who are willing to put in time to help us on this. And so that's really kind of the, if we have treasure, so to speak, it's that.
Awesome. And it's a great, and we're going to share that website, so you should be able to see that if you're watching this. I'm going to throw this to Eric, because I know you're involved, I believe, in the database portion, or which part of that have you become involved in with this project?
Yeah, so the way that I came to this project was basically the three of us are involved in a book project that's coming out in the fall. And it's basically along the lines of creating, you know, diverse programs. It's highlighting underrepresented composers and communities in our wind band field. And I reached out to Rob in my absolute confusion about how to tackle these issues of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and so through Rob. And with the support of Alex and all the other authors part of the book, you know, we were able to create this book. But for my little small portion of ICD, I'm really just kind of looking at the wind band component. And Rob, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a whole bunch of, like, there's chamber winds or chamber music, there's choral, there's orchestral, and so I'm really looking after the wind band component. The best thing about this website is that it just collates all of these underrepresented composers into one single area. And it's a valuable resource, and it was a great resource for the upcoming book as well. And it's a project that I really believe in. So.
All right, so let's talk about the book real quick. Maybe that's down the road, but is there a title? Is there a timeline when this book's going to come out? Sounds like it's related to this project.
Yeah, so the book is called The Horizon Leans Forward. It'll be published through GIA, and it's going to be released this fall. It was supposed to be released at Midwest, but that's not happening anymore. Anyways, it'll be in the fall, and basically it's a two-part book. It'll involve, the first part is just like stories of underrepresented communities in our field. And then the second portion is this annotated bibliography of works by women, LGBTQIA composers, and composers of color. So it's really kind of intended to be like a little companion resource to all the things that are happening in the ICD.
Fantastic. And something to really look forward to for anybody watching, plus the website. So, all right, so let's bring Alex in here. Your role within the ICD, and then also just your role in being a female composer, and obviously you've been involved from the get-go, but what you create and provide is obviously a huge thing for all of us that teach band and program band music every year.
I think, well, my role with the ICD is simply friendly colleague, you know, to have good conversations with Rob and everybody else and move the peg forward with building this database and making sure it's, you know, user friendly and all these things. But on a larger scale, I think I represent what I'd ideally like to say anybody and everybody can do, which is just roll up your sleeves, jump in and raise awareness. And for me, this is a really big aspect of diversity and equity and inclusion efforts, is that every one of us who does see inequities or who does see people and identify people who are really talented, who should be part of what we're doing, should be part of our industry, should have a higher profile as artists, etc., and maybe don't know how to get in or, you know, don't have as much access. This is where all of us who are more, embedded in this field can be so activist and so helpful. I write about this in the book. I will add to what Eric said and say the brilliance of his project is that he asked 6 people to write, and he is one of them. He had 6 people writing 6 different chapters from 6 completely different points of view. So you have Alfred Watkins talking about the African-American experience as a conductor. You have Jodie Blackshaw from Australia talking about, you know, a broader view of diversity issues within the wind band world. You have me talking about, from my own perspective and observations, what it is to be a working woman in the wind band world and how can we help each other. You have Rob Taylor, who's at University of British Columbia, talking about the LGBTQIA2+ experience as conductors and interviewing a great many people. And you've got Courtney Snyder doing the same thing with women conductors, excuse me. And she has gathered, 5 or 6 major conductors historically. Some of them are in their 90s, one of them is in her 90s, I think, to give you that whole swath of view of what the history of being underrepresented as a conductor or as a composer is. So the whole book really tees up, so to speak, the use of these databases. And so getting back to, you know, my role is to raise awareness. I always say that the vast majority of people in our field are not intentionally discriminatory. They are not. They're wonderful people. It just doesn't occur to them that they haven't broadened the scope of their programming. It doesn't occur to them that they're not reaching out to people that don't look like they do. And once you bring it to people's attention and give them tools like databases and other kinds of resources and support and suggestions of, you know, hey, check this person out, check that person out, look at that catalog, listen to this, then, you know, the world, you know, just opens right up, and it does so exponentially. And we see this every year at Midwest, which, you know, we attend every year, right? Exponentially, I'm seeing really big changes. It just takes a bit of patience. So,
Yeah,
And Chad, do you mind if I just jump in
yeah, go ahead.
a little
Yeah.
bit? I just want to just echo what Alex said because it was so good. Alex, that was awesome, by the way.
thank you.
But and Alex talks about this idea of like programming, and one thing that has been really kind of on the forefront of my mind lately is that really our nation is facing like two pandemics. Like we have COVID-19 that we're all kind of planning for, but we also kind of need to plan for and respond to like the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And I think like this is where the ICD can come in and play like a really important role. We as band directors programming, whatever program we're going to have, so hopefully in the fall or winter or spring, we also need to address the Black Lives Matter movement. And the database that Rob has created is that tool, for us to think about how to respond to this dual pandemic.
And what fascinated me with the website was the details that you kind of went through, Rob, on how you can look, when you program, how much, how can you look at programming a concert or a concert series, depending on what your role is, and not so much percentages, but what kind of ratio should you be looking at of number of pieces performed by different composers in that, and that I think that's one of the things that opened up in like this giant, huge collage of just tons of stuff kept coming out. It was like, okay, this is impressive. And same thing, just the list that keeps going on of names and composers that we can all use, and how you've organized it. I just so user friendly, and like you said, Alex, it just opens up. It really opens up doors to people we may not be aware of as teachers or composers or conductors trying to get a bigger scope of what's even available. That's what I've been impressed with, Rob.
Well, I think it touches on a number of things. That one of the reasons why I started this whole project was because I had heard conductors for many years saying that they wanted to be able to perform more works by women composers or by composers of color, but they just didn't know who they were or where to find their works. And the further down this rabbit hole that I went, I discovered that there's the systems that are in place. We hear the term systemic racism over the last couple months because that has become one of the forefront issues. But this is kind of what I've been discovering over the last 4 years or so, is that not on the race side of things, but if we're just looking at composers who are from groups that are underrepresented, basically folks who are not white guys, and specifically living, the dead white guys have the most real estate, so to speak. And then as you get further along on that continuum, it gets less and less and less. But why that happens and how we can go about addressing that and starting to change those programming habits, that's been one of the really fascinating exercises and endeavors that I've kind of, come across, because we keep thinking about, I have to be able to do this, but this is keeping me from doing it, or this is keeping me from doing it. And so kind of how to be able to unspool that and how to kind of unravel that knot and address some of these systemic issues and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it when we're talking to the state list, because that actually touches on a number of there's a lot of components to that mechanism that keep things from becoming more diverse. But I should just also mention that because I talked about the history, but I didn't talk much about actually what's in the site. And so the three big tools that we have are the composer database, which allows for you to be able to search for composers themselves, and that will bring you to their websites using the search components that I mentioned before. We also have a works database, that has been it's been put together by a number of people. You know, Eric mentioned before, I put it together. I started the database, but this thing, we've literally probably had 50 people working on these databases now over the last 4 years. So it's been a lot of folks helping out with these things. But in addition to the composer database, there's also the works database, and that has, for right now, it has 3 components: a wind band, orchestra, and art song. The wind band has about 2,500 works. The orchestra has almost 11,000 works. And I think we're getting pretty close to 2,500 on the art song as well. In addition, Eric mentioned earlier that we're also building a chamber music database and a choral database. And I'm sure we'll add others down the road. But that's really kind of, in order to be able to look up, if you need a work, let's say if you're doing your programming and you want to find a work that has a certain duration, that might have a certain difficulty level, and you're looking for a composer that falls within a particular demographic, you can just basically click, 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 and if you happen to look for someone who lives in Texas, you can click that box, and then suddenly it will give you all of the works that fall under that search component. And we're still growing those lists. I know we still have about 500 composers that aren't yet on the composer database because they're backed up, the backlog of putting those composers in, much less all of these other works to do. The third tool, real quick, is our analysis, where we started off doing an analysis of orchestral seasons last year. I went through and looked at seasons for 120 professional orchestras around the country, and basically put all of that analysis on the website. This year, in addition to doing the same type of thing for professional orchestras, we're also doing analysis of CBDNA concerts over the last 5 years. And hopefully in the next few months, we'll be able to put that analysis out as well, which is really useful for 2 reasons. First, it gives you objective data with which to use, because it's really easy to kind of fall into the trap of going, I feel like I'm doing okay programming wise because, I programmed some Anne McGinty and some Julie Giroux and, maybe some William Owens music on my concert, and I'm good. And then you look back at like what you've done maybe the last 3 years, and you're like, the numbers don't reflect probably what they should. And so that's what we're going to do, is to find that objective data. But in addition to that, to kind of at least show folks what has been going on, it also allows for us to be able to create aggregate lists of all of the works by composers from underrepresented groups that are out there and that have been performed. And as well as I, if you go on Facebook or you go on Twitter, and people are asking all the time, can you suggest works? Like, they don't want to just, it's fine if they look in a book or on a website and they might discover a piece, but they really want to be able to get a sense of what are the pieces that people have already performed. And then they can trust that. There's a little bit less risk to it. And so if by doing this analysis and kind of pulling all of this information out, we can provide these lists that people can then go, okay, here's at least a good starting off point. It might not be all of it. It's not comprehensive, but at least it's a start. It gets their feet in the door, and then they can explore those other composers as they need to.
And that's just in the website when people go and visit and see what's in there. It's really kind of mind-blowing the first time you jump into it and see how much work is there and what's available once you know it exists. And the work that all of you guys have done on this. So, so let's talk about programming. Let's kind of move this into programming and stuff, because band directors hopefully will watch this and say, okay, well, how do I, because this is me, how do I program better? How do I include more? How am I more inclusive in what I program? I have certain limits as a public school teacher, but how are some things, you guys that program on a rate, maybe all 3 of you, what are some things directors can do to help this out, to better choose or kind of fulfill some of these things and not just check off boxes, but find good lit and trying to be more diverse in what they program for their students' exposure.
I think I can jump in. I'll be the one to start conversation. I think kind of like going, at least, and I can just tell you from what we're doing at Oregon State this upcoming fall, you know, kind of talking about that dual crisis, dual pandemic situation. We at OSU have made a commitment for all of our bands, from concert bands down to jazz ensembles, to program at least one work by a composer from an underrepresented community, whether that's a composer of color or a woman. And that's been a really important point for us here at Oregon State, to make that effort. And I think the next thing that we had talked a lot about here at OSU is that we wanted to veer away from this idea of like a token composer or like a token concert, you know, and we felt that by integrating underrepresented composers in every concert, you know, rather than having like, this is going to be like our Asian composer concert and this is going to be our woman composer concert, by integrating it throughout the concert year, we could take away some of those elements of tokenism. I don't know if anyone else has any ideas, but that's at least what we've been doing, or we're going to be doing, at least here at OSU. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. I write about this in the chapter I wrote for Eric's book. My chapter is called Reaching Out and Bringing Women In. And I address the whole ghettoized concert concept, that it is well-meaning conductors who are doing this. I know that they mean well, but it actually does a disservice, frankly, in the end, to underrepresented composers. You lump them all together, and then you think you've checked off that box, as Rob was saying, you know, and boom, you're done. And it's not that. What Eric is saying is absolutely the way to do it, is to just make sure on every one of your concerts, it's not hard, especially in the band world where pieces are shorter, you know, and you're programming more things. It's different, you know, than other genres. Make sure you have at least one, and hopefully more than one, person who is not necessarily a dead white guy. And, you know, I want to add one oblique point that doesn't get spoken of as much. And Rob started to talk about it when he mentioned, you know, the dead white guy real estate issue, the fact that there's a lot of catalog real estate devoted to that, and programs devoted to that. Nothing wrong with the music, obviously. But it points to one very important thing, which is that a reticence or not programming underrepresented composers also means not programming a lot of new music. We have to talk about that. In the band world, this is the least of our issues. Of all the genres, one of the reasons that people like me love to compose for band is because band loves living composers. You love new music, you commission, you perform it many times, you get excited about it. It's awesome. This is why I've written almost 20 band pieces now in the past 10 years. I love this genre. So band, it still is an issue, but not nearly as much as in orchestra or choir or other things, which tend to play it safer. Certainly professional orchestras always feel beholden to their sometimes elderly and sometimes conservative you know, funding sources and patrons. And they somehow think that if they program, you know, contemporary pieces of the patron's time, that the patron's going to pull out all their money and run screaming from the hall. I don't know. I don't know what's that scary about music, but at any rate, it is a real concern. So one of the things that we have to address in band, but orchestra, let's say, is opening up to contemporary music, because it has been in the past 30 years, let's say. We have seen an enormous rise in the number of underrepresented composers making wonderful careers for themselves. Part of this, and I won't go into the whole thing because you can read the chapter, but part of this is because with the advent of the internet, all of a sudden everybody had access. Access is huge. It is huge. If you don't have to be approved of and patted on the head by a publisher or a record company, if you don't have to have those things, there's nothing wrong with them. But if you're not reliant on them, and if you're not reliant on going through a system that approves of you, you can do whatever you want. And you can build your own business, as I did, and, you know, reach the whole world with it. This has been an enormous change the past few decades. As a result, we're seeing that there are so many more living, breathing composers with diverse backgrounds. it is absolutely concomitant with technology and with how the world has changed. Don't ever forget that. And so keep drawing that line between diverse composers and living composers and music of our time, and embrace all of that.
That's fantastic.
So,
And you make it easy. Like we can name the composer that's living and in the band world, like, hey, can we do a Zoom with our ensemble? And, you know, I haven't had a composer say no because unless I'm booked or I'm busy. And what a great...
Sousa will never say yes, though. Sousa always says no, and he doesn't answer his emails. You know, I mean, there is such a benefit to working with living composers for just what you're saying, Chad. We respond, we help. Most of us are wildly enthusiastic about engaging with the bands, and you know, we consider ourselves as part of the educational field, even though people like me are not on faculty anywhere. I'm not a teacher, I'm a full-time composer, but I consider myself an educator as well, because I'm writing pieces with the intent of helping band directors reach their students in hopefully exciting and creative ways. So, you know, this is one of the great things about living composers is we help you. We're part of your process.
And we're going to put your website up right here. And so you can check out Alex's website, buy her music, hit her up for a Zoom meeting with your ensemble.
And there's two things on the website I'll say. One is I make life really easy for band directors, that there is a direct link to a whole page of my band music that you can peruse right there up front, because, you know, a lot of people just want to go straight to that. And the other thing is that, like Rob, I've always had a deep interest in making sure that people have access to a lot of information and resources. And so right there on the first part of my homepage and on the band page and on a few other pages, I have a link to a page I developed about 2 or 3 years ago called Programming Resources, which is a very long list of aggregated links and a few articles and a smattering of my own thoughts on this subject. That is, it is in tandem, of course, and very different. It's not a database. It links, first and foremost, the first link is to ICD, is to Rob's. And then you'll see many, many other links, so that if somebody is looking for Black composers or female composers or Asian composers or, you know, American Indian composer, whatever, it's all there. And it's just one more resource. So this is, again, something everybody can do. Anybody with a website can put together resources to help other people who come to their website. You know, I think that this is part of our joy and responsibility, is to highlight our peers. When one of us does well, everybody does well, if we have that attitude, an attitude of abundance and helping everyone.
Outstanding. So, Rob,
and Chad,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you don't mind, in addition to all of their comments, which is so awesome, Eric and I haven't really even talked about this much, so it's great to...
I have so many opinions.
But it's great because pretty much everything that you just said is like, yeah, that's pretty much what we say too. A couple things in addition to all of that. I've always found, just from my own, in terms of trying to be able to help folks with their programming, is to actually look back and see what you've programmed. Now, say in a high school or in a college setting, you're probably going to have anywhere between, I don't know, 3 to 5 concerts within the course of a year-ish, maybe 6 if you're having a lot of concerts, but, you know, probably somewhere around there. And that's not that many. Like the orchestra analysis that I did last year, some of those, you know, orchestras have a lot of concerts, and if you add up all of their works, it could be anywhere from 20 to almost 100 works within a season. And so I was looking less in terms of how many composers from underrepresented groups were in each individual concert, but I was looking at the entire season. So I would say for someone who was in high school, teaching band or orchestra or choir, or in the higher ed, to maybe look and see what you've done maybe over the last 3 years. So then you have a good number, and then you can kind of see, because every year you're going to have a special concert where you had to do something because that was that year and it was kind of a one-off. But if you say maybe look at what your repertoire has been over the last 3 to 5 years, and then you can see, how much of that repertoire was by composers from underrepresented groups. That's one way. But also you can see how many times you've repeated works by a particular composer, right? And if you happen to be performing a lot of Granger or a lot of Vaughan Williams or a lot of take your pick, you know, living or historical, it helps each conductor, I think, to kind of get a sense in terms of what their tendencies are. And then to recognize, oh, I find myself performing Maslanka every one semester or two semesters because for whatever reason, either I really like Maslanka or my teachers liked Maslanka, and nothing, of course, nothing against any of those composers' works. They're all amazing. But I find oftentimes we as conductors or as just as musicians, we have our own biases that have been informed by our own performative experiences as well as the experiences of our teachers, where when we go out into the field, we think we know what good music is. And I'll bring that up because that comes a lot. People tend to say, well, I just perform good music. And then I'm like, well, what you think is good music is absolutely biased by your own tastes and the tastes of your teachers and their teachers and their teachers, which is why it tends to act as a funnel. And so what we're trying to do is kind of invert that funnel and break open that idea of I can't not perform. It's like expecting an orchestra not to perform Beethoven. People would think that you're doing a disservice because you're not performing Beethoven, even though there's a lot of really good music besides Beethoven. Same thing in band. You know, maybe you only do Granger once every 4 or 5 semesters in order to be able to make sure that students are still getting that repertoire, but maybe not so much of it that it is not allowing you to have room to be able to perform works outside of those canons.
Go ahead, Eric.
So I'm gonna just go off of that, and that word, like specifically like canon, you know, I think in some ways, you know, for Chad, you and I, like just as normal band directors, you know, we don't have to be so beholden to our canon. You know, we don't have a huge depth of repertoire that we can pull from, like our orchestral or our choir colleagues. And so like I would urge, like, you know, band directors that are listening up there, to take a chance. You know, I think that someone had to take a chance on Viet Cuong, you know, and discover his music. You know, someone had to take a chance on Alex's music or Jennifer Jolly or anyone like that, or Omar Thomas. You know, and I think like we as band directors, we have that kind of pioneering spirit, you know, because we don't have that depth of canon, you know, and we can come together as cohorts, as consortiums, and really try and find, you know, more of these up and coming composers. And I think that's, for me, the exciting part about being a band director, because we don't have that huge depth of canon that we're kind of beholden to, you know, and so we can be a little bit more forward thinking, you know, and take chances, take risks, and you know, try new music, you know, as Alex was saying, by living composers, and just like see what's out there.
And there are a couple of great benefits to exactly what Eric is saying, which is so joyous. First of all, as a band director, it will make your life a lot more interesting because instead of playing the same pieces all the time, you as an artist, because you are all artists, you're all wonderful musicians, you get to open your hearts and experience and express yourselves through different music. So I would think it makes your day-to-day work life much more fun. And the other thing is for those who commission who are the great frontiers people, which is very much how I view my commissioners, especially with the wacky stuff I do, because I do electroacoustic band music, which is not a huge niche. And so the people who take a chance on me and do that are really part of history in that sense too, because assuming that these growing catalogs of new music, whether they're acoustic or electroacoustic, they continue long after we're looking at the daisies from the other side, they continue and your names are in those publications forevermore. You are the ones that brought those pieces to life. You are the ones that are the heroes who took historically chances on composers that then years later became noted composers. And it's a little bit of a crapshoot. You don't know for sure when you commission a new face. You don't know what their career trajectory is going to be, but you have faith. I always joke that we're in a faith-based business. You have to have faith. It's all just going to work out. You have to put your faith in somebody. If you see a spark in a composer, put your faith in that composer and say, hey, let me give you a shot. That's what was done for me 12 years ago when I started writing band music. And I was in my late 40s at that point. I didn't start out early in this field, in that part of the field. But that's it. It just takes somebody taking a risk and putting trust, and the joy that can come from that years down the road, and the indelible nature of that relationship is precious.
Here.
And so, Chad, I'm gonna add another spoke to this wheel, which is growing and gorgeous and glorious and all of that we're all talking about. And I love the idea of it being a circle because it's all kind of coming into the same goals. And I've had a lot of folks kind of ask what the goals of the Institute, why did we actually do this? And it's easy to assume that something like this is here because I'm a composer and there's all these composers that people need to know their music and know their musical voices. And so we're there to support these composers. And of course we are. But the way that I've been kind of coming about this, and this has been a bit of a voyage of discovery for myself as I go through this. The real goal is to be able to connect students and audience members, the people who are actually engaging with the music, whether or not it's the people who are in the audience when the music is being performed, or especially in an educational setting, the students who are actually engaging in it as they perform, but also as they learn about it. I've had a number of folks ask me, why is the Institute? Like, what's the point of what we do? And oftentimes I've had a number of people say, well, you're a composer. Are you just trying to get work for your friends? And I'm like, well, that's not a bad thing. But it's not the end goal. And it really hasn't ever been. Ultimately, the whole point of this project has been to be able to allow audience members and students, specifically audience members, I think on the professional side of things, but say in K-12 or higher ed, yes, there are audiences and that's good, but a lot of times it's the students who are in those bands, in those orchestras, in those choirs, that are really engaging in the music and with those composers. That's kind of the end goal. In order to be able to introduce those audience members, those students, to voices they have not heard before, and specifically voices from people who might be like them. It's really, really important for your students to be able to perform music by composers who are like them. And as you know, there's a lot of schools out there, both higher ed and K-12, where the students are not white. And for the most part, they're at least 50% female, if not more than 50% female. And so the more conductors and directors ignore that and just perform the classics from whatever genre, it tends to just ignore that. So it's much more difficult to connect with those audiences, much more difficult to connect with those students. So that's a really big, important part of this, is that as you are programming, you have to you shouldn't, it's the best way to put this, you shouldn't program a work by an underrepresented composer just to perform a work by an underrepresented composer. And definitely you shouldn't convey it in that way, like you are checking a box, to your students, to your audiences. You want the students to be able to understand who these people are as people and put them into a historical context, put them into a societal context. or a sociological context of how difficult was it for Lily Boulanger or Amy Beach or William Grant Still to compose in their world at that time, or at the same time here, like Viet Quang was mentioned before. Until recently, we really didn't see many composers from Southeast Asia at all. And over the last few years, we've seen more and more of that. And I know just from experience, because I've seen a lot of young composers myself, that it has to do with either the existence or the lack of models. If they see other people like them doing this, it's much more easy for them to think about, hey, maybe I could do this too. And it's kind of a grassroots move where the more works that are performed by composers outside of the traditional demographics, the more composers we are going to have from all of those groups, to the point where hopefully at some point we won't even have to call them underrepresented groups anymore, because they will be represented at a good level.
Yeah, outstanding. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say one thing with that. One of the main things, because I think what we're really talking about to kind of really back it up is about racism, about systemic racism. And one of the biggest ways to fight that is through representation. This idea that you see a diverse group of people and they're all represented, and I think it just normalizes something that right now is very different, but it becomes just a normal thing. Like, we're just going to program a work by a Vietnamese composer along with an American composer or a British composer. But yeah, that phrase representation, I think, is really key to fighting this idea of racism or of inequity in our field.
Yeah, and just stuff that we all have to really address and bring to our ensembles and our students and wherever we're at, whoever we're connecting with that's making the music. A lot of us just lead the music, but they're making the music.
Mm-hmm.
And Chad, this would be a perfect time to connect with the topic of state lists that we brought up before, because the system, when we're talking about systemic racism, systemic, I'm not even sure what you would call it. It's basically, it's just sorry, it's the end of the week.
Like biases.
It's been a long week. To look at the system of how state repertoire lists have been created. Myself, this was something that was brought up to me because one of my colleagues over at Ithaca College brought it up to me, and at the same time, I met Brandon Hotalon, who's at Texas Abilene University, as well as Amy Rever Oberly, who teaches middle school in Michigan. At the same time, I've also met Corey Meals, who teaches at the University of Houston. And the four of us kind of like we're all, thinking about this stuff and working on the idea of how do we diversify state lists at the same time. And so kind of the four of us have kind of banded together. Everybody is either Corey's working with me now as kind of the head of our analysis group. Both Brandon and Amy are on our advisory council. They also have a group that they've created called On the List, that they're working on this. And basically what we're doing is we're looking at each state list, and we have about 25, 26 states that we've gone through, and look to see what the numbers are like. And shocker, they're all bad. Probably on either category, women or composers of color, it's anywhere between maybe 1% to 5%. Not great. But the problem with that is, it's one thing to just say, okay, this list is bad. The problem is that then you look at distributors like J.W. Pepper and Stanton's and all of these folks. They make their decisions on which works are going to be made available through their distribution centers by what works are being required on these state lists. It's not comprehensive, but at the very least, if works are on those lists, they are going to be available through these And that's really important because, especially in the K-12 model, oftentimes business offices within a school district will have a PO only with one of those distributors like Pepper. And then the teachers are forced to only purchase their music through Stanton's or through Pepper or through one of the other distributors. So you see there's like this layer upon layer. If someone wants to be able to purchase or rent those works, it's really difficult. So the point of tension, the nexus point that we're trying to adjust is if we can get states to diversify their states, well, that will open things up at the distribution level, and then that will then filter out and make it that much more easy for folks out in the field to be able to do better programming.
And I'll just toss in, it will also benefit financially the composer publisher, because increasingly a lot of composers are handling their own publishing. We have our own publishing companies. We set up distribution deals like I have with Hal Leonard, etc. But we are the ones that financially are hurt or will financially benefit from inclusion or not of these on the state lists.
Very cool. And because Alex, I mean, you're a composer, and so this is important to have your works on those lists, because that means more exposure and a lot more playing for groups. Do you have music that's on the list right now in different states?
Very little. And you know, I have to say I get an awful lot of performances and they find me in different ways, but they're not finding me on the list. They're not doing it because of the list. I think I've got one piece on a Florida list or something like that. I really, it's kind of silly. And I know, people are trying to change that. And Brandon and Amy and these efforts with On the List is a terrific initiative. Are going to make a very big change. And again, it's going to happen exponentially. Another example of this kind of change and how easy it is to make change once you raise awareness and point out the problems and deal with it on a localized level. I mean, in this case, they're trying to deal with it state by state, and with the committees, which are often made up of right? They're trying to change the hearts and minds of the committees and open them up to the quality music that is available. Another example that happened recently, Midwest Clinic, their board of directors has become wonderfully diverse over the years. However, they, as an organization, it's a very austere, traditional group, very old institution. And, they have been mired in, it's a publishers conference to a large degree, but it has been mired in a lot of rules and regulations and lack of oversight that have allowed again, that 3% number, 4% number of underrepresented composers being performed every year at this massive clinic to which almost 20,000 people attend. So what they finally did this last year, which was quite laudable, they decided to put in a rule saying that for any ensemble who selected to perform at Midwest, of course it's a moot point this year, but we move forward, any ensemble must include at least one underrepresented composer on their program. Now, what the term underrepresented means, can be argued one way or the other. We're not going to get into the weeds with that, but it is absolutely a step in the right direction. And what will happen is you're going to see a massive change very quickly, exponentially, in the number of underrepresented composers who get exposure to thousands and thousands of band directors all of a sudden because of this. And then what will also happen is that within a handful of years, you're not going to even need this rule anymore, because it becomes self-perpetuating. When people bristle at quotas or affirmative action or whatever you want to call it, I understand why they bristle, but it's needed to get us out of the systemic problems from which we suffer. Once you get that shove off the ledge, which Midwest, for example, did, and they are an influencer. When Midwest does it, that makes a very big statement to the rest of the community. And once that happens, it sets a whole lot of positive things in motion, and it opens the floodgates to the awareness of so many new composers, and that will solve the problem. So it won't even be a need or a thing to have to put these rules into place and do so much awareness raising, because also we tend to raise awareness for our own. Black composers will tell you about other Black composers, women tell you about other women, Asians tell you about other Asians. It's great because, we have our own communities of best friends and people to hang out with, and so we know where talent lies in different areas that maybe a white man wouldn't know because that's not his circle, and it doesn't have to be. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's is all good, and I just wanted to put a very shiny, happy face on this. And what Rob is saying, the power of the lists and the power of changing rules to make sure that everybody can be included.
And Rob, can you tell us about On the List? Is that a part of the ICD, or where do we find that?
So On the List is they do not yet have a website, but basically it's a group. I think they may have a Facebook group that they've put together, and I can put you in contact with Brandon to give you more information for this. But basically, it's the brainchild of Brandon Hotelin and Amy Rever Oberly, and basically between the two of us, between the two groups, their group and our group, we're both. It's both looking at current state lists and kind of analyzing the repertoire, looking at the numbers, but then also advocating at the state level. In Texas, in Michigan, in Kansas, here in New York, Florida, all of these different states are really becoming much more interested in this. And slowly over time, I think we are going to be able to see those numbers. And it's a challenge at this with these state lists, because a lot of the repertoire that are on the lists, it may be out of date. Like it may just be, it's not published anymore. But the problem is they don't want to take it off the list because there are so many schools that have that music in their catalogs. Like they purchased it 20 years ago. And so they're afraid that if they cull it from the list, then, well, that's music that, why do they even keep it? Right. So it's a challenge. And there are a couple of states, Virginia comes to mind, that I think they have like 13,000 works on their list. It's huge because they never got rid of anything. And so how to be able to diversify something like that, that's a bit of a challenge. It might not be quite that many, but it's a lot. But it's still there's a lot of challenges with this, but at the same time, ultimately it will be for the good. And I see more and more states doing this, especially the ones that can change it every year. I think it's just gonna keep going higher and higher, just as Alex was saying.
That's the next initiative, Off the List.
Off, yes.
We need a Facebook group called Off the List, and everybody can weigh in on these old pieces that are kind of mediocre, and we'll just say, 86 it.
Absolutely. That I'll get behind.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Ditch the list.
It's true. There's stuff that hasn't been played. People have done that research and stuff that's been on lists for years and hasn't been played in years. And, why is it still there? So, and this has been awesome. A topic that us as band directors know is we need to face and deal with, and we all have different populations in front of us when we teach or run a rehearsal or conduct or select music, and just hearing the resources that are available and what you all have created and Rob, the ICD thing and such a valuable resource for those that have, ready to, I'm going to do more of this. I want to get this more included in how I program every year for my concerts and for my students and my performers, to have a home base to go to and say, okay, I want to go this route. I've got this population and find those types of things. It's a great resource. And it's been fantastic to listen to you all three just kind of talk about it, and then where we're at in dealing with the systemic racism and how that applies to us in music and the band world and everything the choices we get to make. It's exciting, and it's kind of reassuring knowing there's a resource available to help guide us through this for those that aren't sure where to turn. I've been lucky just to reach out and get a hold of you three, but not everybody can do that. And now there's a place and a home base to go to. So thanks for starting that and sharing the time with us. It's just a wonderful conversation with you all.
Thank you so much, Chad.
Yeah.
So one of the big things I love to do with Hey Band Network is, because I take a little bit of your time, is to give everybody a chance to do some shout outs. So if there's anything you want to give a shout out, I'll start with Eric.
Oh gosh. I guess I should probably plug the book. I would like to shout out the book. It is The Horizon Leans Forward. It'll be published through GIA in the fall. It will feature both Rob and Alex, as well as Rob Taylor at UBC, Courtney Snyder-Ing at Michigan, Alfred Watkins, as well as Jody Blackshaw and myself. Yeah, it's going to be hopefully a well-received book, and I'm really excited that the three of us can bring this book to fruition. So.
Yeah, and if you ever watch TV and they play football in college, Oregon State University, you might check out
Oregon State.
program there.
Go Beavers.
Alex, any shout outs you would like to give?
Sure. You have been on Facebook and are aware that recently a new initiative was started called the Creative Repertoire Initiative, and it has gone off like gangbusters. And what it is 11 composers, myself included, and one intrepid conductor, Robert Ambrose, formed this group to powwow about creating adaptable and flexible music for all the obvious reasons that everybody's going to hit in the fall. Forward. So it's a two-pronged approach. The 11 of us have all been writing new, flex, and adaptable pieces. Woohoo! And we've been encouraging all of our peers to do the same. And oh my gosh, the response has been incredible. As of this morning, I think we're approaching 3,700 members on our Facebook group. Please check it out. Join Creative Repertoire Initiative. I just finished a piece for this, which I call Ultraflex. It's called Passages, and it's really, really fun. So, and there's a plane going overhead right now. Sorry. So I'll stop there. But go to Creative Repertoire Initiative.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And Rob.
Sure. Well, I'll give two shout outs. One of which is that if you're interested in music, you should check out Adjective New Music, which is a distribution network that not only do they distribute a lot of my music, but also they have a lot of music by underrepresented composers that you should check out. It's got a lot of really amazing composers and a lot of amazing music there, so you should check that out, Adjective New Music. But also, I should give a shout out to this project, Institute for Composer Diversity, that you may have heard of. And if you're interested in connecting with me at all, you can contact me at rob@composerdiversity.com. And especially if there are folks, say, at the collegiate level or even at the high school level, if there are folks who are interested in helping, I've lost count of how many people who have come to me and asked, hey, I'd love to be able to help in any way possible. What kind of projects do you have? And I've got this long list of either working on the databases or helping out with the analysis projects or just any number of things. It's become a very large project from a very small beginning, and I'm still trying to figure out how to be able to make the thing run. And through the work of volunteers, especially in the last few months, it's just gone gangbusters. So it's been wonderful to work and meet all these folks around the country. And if anyone's interested, they can connect with me and we'll go from there.
Outstanding. Well, Eric, Alex, Rob, thank you very much for joining on the Hey Band Network. Just a great conversation on some stuff that it's time for us to really address in the band world and improve and share what great resources are out there that may not have always been played or have been available. So thank you for bringing out the Institute of Composer Diversity and sharing your time with us today. Anyone else watching, check out the Hey Band Network, our YouTube channel, or see us on Facebook to see other exciting topics that we've had and had discussions on this. Thank you all very much for joining me today.